You have noticed a pattern, and it troubles you more deeply than you usually admit. You value honesty, so you try to be honest. You believe in treating people with respect, so you extend respect even when it costs you. You have spent years, maybe decades, cultivating integrity. Not because you think it makes you special, but because living any other way feels like a betrayal of yourself. And yet, when you look around at the people in your life, when you really look, you see something that makes no sense. The people closest to you, the ones who have made their way into your inner circle, the ones you have trusted and supported and believed in, so many of them turn out to be toxic, manipulative, exploitative, dishonest in ways that shock you once you finally see it clearly. This has happened enough times that you cannot call it coincidence. You have asked yourself the hard questions. Maybe you are too trusting. Maybe you are naive. Maybe your boundaries are weak. Maybe something in you is broken that keeps attracting broken people. You have read the articles about codependency and people-pleasing. You have worked on yourself, really worked, examining your patterns and your wounds and your unconscious motivations. And still, it keeps happening. People who seemed genuine reveal themselves to be users. People who spoke your language about values and consciousness turn out to have been performing, not living those values. People you championed turn on you the moment you stop serving their needs. You are tired. Not just tired, but exhausted in a way that goes deeper than lack of sleep. Exhausted in your soul, and you're starting to wonder if integrity itself is the problem. If maybe the people who don't think so much, who don't examine themselves so carefully, who take what they want without all this internal wrestling, maybe they have it figured out and you are the fool. But what if I told you that what you are experiencing is not evidence of your failure, but evidence of a mechanism you have not understood? That people of integrity do not end up surrounded by toxic people despite their integrity, but in a very specific sense, because of it. Not because integrity is weakness, not because you are doing something wrong, but because of how integrity functions in a world where most people operate without the kind of self-examination you take for granted. Hannah Arendt spent her life studying how human beings relate to truth, to themselves, to each other. She watched ordinary people participate in extraordinary evil, and what troubled her most was not the monsters, but the absence of thought. The banality of evil, she called it. The way people could commit atrocities without reflection, without internal dialogue, without stopping to examine whether what they were doing was right. And in her work on the human condition, she explored something else, something that matters deeply to understanding your situation. She wrote about the space of appearance, the public realm where we become visible to each other through our words and actions. And she understood that some people live in constant dialogue with themselves, constantly examining their thoughts and behaviors, while others move through life without that inner conversation, without thought. Not because they are stupid, but because they have never developed the habit of reflection. When you live with integrity, you are engaged in constant internal dialogue. You examine your motives. You catch yourself when you are being unfair. You question your assumptions. You hold yourself accountable even when no one else is watching. This is not something you chose because it seemed virtuous. It is simply how your consciousness operates. You cannot not think about whether you are being honest, whether you are being kind, whether you are living according to what you actually believe. This self-examination is not occasional for you. It is continuous. It is the background hum of your existence. And this makes you fundamentally different from people who do not engage in this kind of reflection. Not better necessarily, but different in a way that has profound consequences for how you move through the world and who is attracted to you. Here is what happens. When you operate from integrity, when you are genuinely trying to be honest and fair and conscious, you become a particular kind of presence in the world. You become, in Arendtian terms, a space of appearance where things become visible. Your integrity throws other people's lack of integrity into relief. Your honesty makes their dishonesty apparent. Your willingness to examine yourself highlights their unwillingness to do the same. You are not trying to do this. You are not holding yourself up as superior. You are simply being who you are. But in being who you are, you create a contrast. And certain people are drawn to that contrast, not to learn from it, but to use it. Think about what it feels like to be someone who does not examine themselves, who does not engage in internal dialogue, who operates largely on impulse and self-interest without the friction of self-questioning. For such a person, there is often an ambient anxiety, a sense that something is missing, even if they cannot name it. They may feel hollow, though they would never use that word. They may sense that other people seem to have something they lack, some groundedness, some coherence. And when they encounter someone with integrity, someone who actually walks their talk, who struggles visibly with trying to do right, they experience a kind of relief. Finally, a person who feels real, who has that thing they cannot find in themselves, they move closer, they befriend you, romance you, work alongside you. And you, because you assume others are engaged in the same kind of self-examination you are, because you project your internal process onto them, you assume they are like you. You assume they share your values because they speak the language of those values. You assume they think about things the way you do because they nod along when you express what matters to you. But here is the mechanism you have not seen. These people are not drawn to you to become more like you. They are drawn to you to borrow your integrity, to exist in its warmth without generating it themselves. Your presence makes them feel better about themselves without them having to do the work of actually examining themselves. You become, without realizing it, a kind of mirror that reflects back to them a better version of themselves than actually exists. When they are near you, they feel like good people. Your integrity rubs off on them socially. Other people see them with you and assume they share your qualities. They get the benefit of your reputation, your trustworthiness, your depth, without having earned it through their own self-examination. And more than this, more insidiously, they begin to use you as their conscience. Instead of developing their own internal dialogue, their own capacity for self-reflection, they outsource that function to you. If this perspective is opening something up for you, consider subscribing. I explore these territories every week, and I would love to have you along for the journey. You start to notice a pattern in these relationships. You are always the one examining whether something is fair. You are always the one considering other perspectives. You are always the one who feels responsible for the emotional and moral weight of the relationship. They come to you with their problems, their confusions, their moral dilemmas, and you help them think through it. You offer perspective, nuance, consideration of consequences. You hold space for their complexity. And they take what you offer, they feel better, and then they go back to operating exactly as they did before. They do not develop their own capacity for this kind of reflection. Why would they? You are doing it for them. You are functioning as their external conscience, and as long as you are there, they do not need to cultivate an internal one. I know many of you watching this have felt this exact dynamic without having language for it. You have been the person everyone comes to for advice, for perspective, for moral clarity, and yet you look around and realize none of these people actually embody the values they claim to share with you. You have been carrying the emotional and ethical labor for your relationships, for your workplace, maybe for your entire family, and you are exhausted. And you have never told anyone how alone this makes you feel because you thought maybe you were just being arrogant, just being judgmental. But here is what I want you to understand. This is not about being better than others. This is about consciousness. And consciousness is lonely when you are the only one carrying it. So let me ask you directly, when did you first realize you were surrounded by people who did not value what you valued? How long have you been the one doing the thinking for everyone around you? I want you to share in the comments, not because I need engagement, but because someone else watching this needs to see your words. They need to know they are not alone in this exhaustion. And if you cannot find the words right now, if it feels too heavy to articulate, just type this: I have been the moral container for others. That is it, just those 7 words. Because when you do, you create permission for dozens of others to say it too. Your honesty, your willingness to be seen in your struggle, it helps break the silence that keeps all of us isolated. So comment below. Tell me where you are in this. I read every single one, and I promise you, you are not alone in what you are feeling. Now let me take this deeper, because there is something else happening that you need to understand. Toxic people are not drawn to you despite your integrity. They are drawn to you because your integrity makes you safe for them to be themselves around. Think about that carefully. When someone lacks the capacity for self-reflection, when they operate primarily from self-interest, without the friction of examining whether that self-interest is harming others, they often face a problem. Most people eventually notice. Most people eventually pull away. Most relationships reach a point where the toxic person's behavior creates consequences, where they get called out, where they lose the friendship or the job or the partnership. But you are different. Your integrity includes an assumption of good faith. You assume people are trying. You assume miscommunication before manipulation. You give people the benefit of the doubt, not because you are naive, but because that is how you would want to be treated. You know you are not perfect. You make mistakes and you appreciate when others extend grace to you, so you extend grace to others. Toxic people learn this about you very quickly. They learn that you will forgive, that you will listen to their explanations, that you will try to understand their perspective even when their behavior has hurt you. They learn that you will examine your own role in conflicts, that you will consider whether you are being too sensitive or too demanding. They learn that you will give them second chances, third chances, many chances, because you believe in growth and you remember times when you needed chances too. And so they feel safe with you in a way they do not feel safe with others. Safe to be selfish, safe to be dishonest, safe to use you. Because your integrity means you will not retaliate the way others might. You will not gossip about them. You will not turn others against them. You will not be cruel even when they have been cruel to you. Your integrity protects them from the natural consequences of their toxicity. And they exploit that protection while calling you friend, calling you partner, calling you family. This is why you keep ending up in these situations, not because you are broken, but because your integrity creates conditions that toxic people find irresistible. You are in a sense too useful to them. You offer something they cannot find elsewhere, a relationship where they can take without giving, where they can be thoughtless without reflection, where they can hurt without accountability, all while maintaining the story that they are good people because they are close to you, because you, a person of obvious integrity, have chosen them. Your presence in their life is evidence of their worth, evidence they do not have to generate through their own behavior. And here is where it gets even more painful. You start to notice that when you finally do set a boundary, when you finally say, "This is not okay," when you finally stop accepting behavior that violates your values, these people are shocked, genuinely shocked. They cannot believe you would turn on them like this. They call you judgmental. They say you have changed. You are not the understanding person you used to be. They feel betrayed, and their shock is real because they actually believed the relationship was mutual, that they were giving as much as they were taking, that their presence in your life was as valuable to you as yours was to them. They believed this because you never made them feel otherwise. Your integrity meant you did not keep score. You did not throw past grievances in their face. You focused on moving forward, on assuming the best, on believing growth was possible. And so they genuinely did not see the imbalance. They did not see how much you were carrying. Because seeing that would require reflection, and reflection is precisely what they do not do. When you enforce a boundary, when you step back from a toxic relationship, you're often confused by how much you doubt yourself. You wonder if you are being too harsh, if you are not being forgiving enough, if you are abandoning someone who needs you. This doubt is another feature of integrity. People without integrity do not doubt themselves when they cut someone off. They do not agonize over whether they are being fair. They simply move on to the next person who will serve their needs. But you agonize, you examine, you question whether you are the problem. And often you give in to that doubt, you go back, you give another chance, and the cycle continues. Arendt wrote about the space of appearance, the public realm where human beings reveal themselves through action and speech. She understood that we only become real to each other through this revelation, through showing who we are in the presence of others. But she also understood that some people are incapable of genuine appearance. They perform. They present a self that has been calculated to achieve certain effects rather than revealing an examined self. People without integrity are always performing. They are always managing how they appear because they do not have a coherent self underneath to reveal. The performance is all there is. And your integrity, your genuine appearance, your willingness to be vulnerable and real, this reveals their performance by contrast. It makes obvious that they are not really there the way you are there. And this is threatening to them even as it is useful to them. So they stay close to you, feeding off your realness, while simultaneously resenting you for having what they lack. You have probably noticed this resentment, even if you could not name it. The way they undermine you while claiming to support you. The way they compete with you while claiming to celebrate you. The way they need you while simultaneously trying to diminish you. This is not paradoxical. This is the natural response of someone who has built their identity on performance, encountering someone whose identity is built on substance. They need your substance. They cannot generate it themselves, but they resent needing it. And that resentment leaks out in small cruelties, small betrayals, small violations of trust that you make excuses for, because you cannot imagine being that petty, that envious, that small. So you assume you are misreading the situation. But you are not misreading it. You are just encountering something your integrity makes hard for you to fully believe. That some people genuinely do not care about being good. They care about appearing good, and they will use actually good people to maintain that appearance. Now we have to talk about what this does to you over time, because this is not just about being disappointed in relationships. This is about the slow erosion of your faith in humanity. Every time you trust someone who turns out to be toxic, every time you invest in a relationship that reveals itself to be exploitative, every time you extend yourself for someone who was only taking, something hardens in you. You start to wonder if integrity is a liability. You start to notice how the people who seem happiest, who seem most successful, are often the ones who do not think the way you think, who do not examine the way you examine, who take what they want without your hesitation. And you start to feel like a fool, like your values have made you weak, like all your self-examination and moral wrestling has just made you an easy mark. This is moral injury. It is not just sadness or disappointment. It is a wound to your fundamental sense of how the world works, of whether being good means anything. And it is compounded by the fact that you cannot really talk about it, because when you try to explain what you have experienced, you sound judgmental. You sound like you are claiming to be better than others. You sound bitter and self-righteous. People tell you to let it go, to forgive, to stop holding grudges. They tell you not everyone has to meet your standards, that you are being too demanding. And maybe you start to believe them. Maybe you start to think your integrity itself is the problem, that you need to be more flexible, more accepting, less rigid in your values. But flexibility is not what is needed here. Understanding is what is needed. You need to understand what has been happening to you, so you can stop blaming yourself for the natural consequences of being conscious in a world where most people operate without consciousness. If what I am sharing here resonates with something you have been feeling, something you have not quite been able to name, then I want you to know you are not alone in this. There are many of us exploring these questions, sitting with these uncomfortable truths, learning to see in new ways. I create these videos for people who are ready to go deeper, who are not satisfied with surface answers, who want to understand rather than just feel better temporarily. If that is you, consider subscribing, not because you need another channel to follow, but because this journey of understanding yourself, of waking up to what is real, it helps to have companions along the way. People who will not offer you easy fixes, but will sit with you in the questions. I will be here every week with another exploration, another perspective, another thread to pull on. And I would be honored to have you here as part of this community of seekers and thinkers. So if this feels right, hit that subscribe button. And if you found value in this particular exploration, let me know in the comments what resonated most with you. Your reflections often illuminate things I had not considered. So what do you do with this understanding? Because I am not going to tell you to abandon your integrity. I am not going to suggest you become more like the people who have hurt you. That is not the answer. But the answer is also not to keep doing what you have been doing. You cannot keep approaching relationships as if everyone operates from the same internal process you do. You cannot keep assuming that people who speak the language of values actually live those values. You cannot keep taking responsibility for the consciousness of others. This is the shift that must happen. Not a shift away from integrity, but a shift in understanding what integrity requires of you in relationships. Integrity does not require endless patience with people who are not doing their own work. Integrity does not require you to be the conscience for people who refuse to develop one. Integrity does not require you to stay in relationships where you are being used. Real integrity, the kind Arendt would recognize, includes integrity toward yourself. It includes recognizing when you are betraying yourself by staying loyal to people who are not loyal to you. It includes acknowledging the reality of who people are rather than who you wish they would be or who they present themselves as being. This is harder than it sounds, because you have probably built an identity around being understanding, being patient, being the person who never gives up on others. And there is value in those qualities. But when those qualities become a way to avoid seeing what is actually true, when they become a way to tolerate mistreatment while calling it compassion, they are no longer integrity. They are avoidance dressed up as virtue. You need to become discerning, not cynical, not closed but discerning. You need to learn to recognize thoughtlessness when you encounter it. People reveal themselves through patterns, not through isolated actions. Watch how people treat others, not just how they treat you in the beginning when they are still performing. Watch how they respond when you set boundaries, when you say no, when you express a need. Watch whether they examine themselves when conflict arises or only examine you. Watch whether they apologize by actually changing behavior or only by saying words designed to get you to stop being upset. Watch whether they take responsibility or whether they always have an explanation that makes them the victim. These patterns tell you whether someone is capable of genuine relationship or whether they are only capable of using you as long as you are useful. And you need to let go of the belief that you can inspire change through your example. This is one of the most painful illusions people of integrity carry. We believe that if we just love enough, if we just show through our own behavior what is possible, if we just hold space for long enough, the other person will finally see, will finally choose to examine themselves, will finally develop their own integrity. But consciousness cannot be taught to someone who does not want to learn. Integrity cannot be inspired in someone who prefers the ease of thoughtlessness. You are not failing when people do not rise to meet you. You are encountering the limits of what one person can do for another. We can show, we can invite, but we cannot force. And continuing to try is not noble. It is exhausting yourself against a wall that will not move. This does not mean you become harsh. This does not mean you stop caring about others. This does not mean you close your heart. What it means is that you become realistic about what kinds of relationships are actually possible with different kinds of people. Some people can be friendly acquaintances, but not close friends because they do not have the capacity for the depth and mutuality that close friendship requires. Some people can be colleagues but not confidants because they will use what you share to advantage themselves. Some people need to be at a distance because being close to them requires you to abandon your own well-being. And recognizing this, accepting this, is not judgment. It is clarity. It is seeing things as they are rather than as you wish they were. You will probably grieve when you start to see clearly. You will grieve the relationships you thought you had but did not actually have. You will grieve the community you thought you belonged to but were actually just serving. You will grieve the future you imagined with people who were never really there. This grief is real, and it is important. Let yourself feel it. But do not let that grief convince you that you were wrong to have integrity. Do not let it convince you that being conscious is the problem. The problem is not your consciousness. The problem is that consciousness is rare, and in its rarity it becomes a resource that unconscious people exploit. But you cannot solve that problem by becoming unconscious yourself. You can only solve it by becoming more selective about who gets access to your consciousness, about who gets to benefit from your emotional and moral labor. What you will discover, if you make this shift, is that your circle becomes smaller but infinitely more nourishing. You will stop being surrounded by toxic people because you will stop being available for them to surround. You will stop attracting users because you will stop offering them what they are looking for. And in that space, in that intentional solitude, you will eventually find the few people who actually are doing their own work, who actually are examining themselves, who actually can meet you in genuine relationship rather than performance. These people exist. They are rare, but they exist. And they are looking for you as much as you are looking for them. But you cannot find them while you are still occupied with people who are only taking. You have to create space. You have to be willing to be alone for a while. And you have to trust that integrity, real integrity, will recognize itself when it finally encounters itself. So here is what I want to leave you with. You are not broken. Your integrity is not a flaw. The fact that you have ended up surrounded by toxic people is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that you have not understood the mechanism by which integrity functions as an attractor for toxicity in a world where most people do not examine themselves. Now that you understand, you can make different choices, not by becoming less integrous, but by becoming more discerning about who deserves your integrity, who has earned access to your depth, who is capable of reciprocity. You do not owe your consciousness to people who refuse to develop their own. You do not owe your emotional labor to people who would never offer the same. You do not owe loyalty to people who only stay close to you because you make them feel better about themselves without requiring them to actually be better. Your integrity is precious. Protect it. Not by hiding it, but by offering it only where it can be received, where it can be met, where it can be honored. The rest is just exhausting yourself against people who are not really there, and that is not virtue. That is just refusing to see what is true. And you, of all people, know better than to refuse to see what is true.